A moment, but one news and programming note. President Obama will be making a statement at about 10:35 this morning. He'll be joined by Secretary Clinton in the Rose Garden commenting. We'll be watching that. You can find out more about where that will be broadcast on cspan.org. Let's go to the House floor now.
Parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member, other than the majority and the minority leaders and the minority whip, limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In meeting with hundreds of constituents and dozens of small businesses this summer, one theme emerges repeatedly: the price that American families and small business continue to pay for the near collapse of our economy. Earlier this year, new examples emerged of manipulation that was harmful, in some cases potentially illegal, by Wall Street in New York and Fleet Street in London. Financial interests continue their assault on even modest reforms in the Dodd-Frank financial legislation protections for consumers and for the financial system itself. Now, clearly, elements are a little overly complex and not perfect, but in part that's the result of aggressive action from the industry itself assaulting the regulatory process. On the campaign trail, Governor Romney and his running mate argue for less protection and a return to largely self-regulation of banks that nearly brought the global economy to its knees. At the same time, the Republican Party's response to the challenges of the mountain of student debt is first to reduce the funding for Pell Grants that help make college more affordable for low-income students, and then they would help fewer student borrowers but help more bankers by giving the lending business back to the private sector, backed by a government guarantee, by the way, hardly a free market solution. Governor Romney famously pointed out that if this doesn't work for you, you can always borrow from your parents. I think most people, not just Republicans or Democrats, independents, believe that's not the solution. It's more of the problem, even for those students who may be able to have parents that could finance them. There are things that we can do. We should, of course, fight to protect the reforms and the restraints on Wall Street and protect direct, lower-cost lending to college students. But we also might inject a little more competition into the financial marketplace. Now, for millions of Americans, a little competition to the big banks comes from credit unions, who are more on the scale of a community bank. Most are small to medium-sized, very local, and nonprofit, with volunteer membership board of directors. That non-profit status is important. They not only don't pay taxes, they're not paying dividends to stockholders or multi-million-dollar bonuses to CEO. They use that advantage to lower costs and improve service. But the credit unions are currently prohibited from lending more than 12.25% of their assets to business. Now, legislation has been proposed to raise this lending cap to a little more of a quarter of the assets that would be ideal for small business lending. It wasn't the credit unions on Main Street that almost brought the economy to its knees. It was Wall Street gamblers and too often cheaters in the financial sector. They were skirting the law and in some cases breaking it. Maybe it's time that we give small businesses a boost by giving commercial banks a little competition. I hope my colleagues will not just sponsor H.R. 1418, the Small Business Lending Enhancement Act of 2011, but also be an advocate. It will be a strong signal that we truly want competition in the financial arena, that actions have consequences, and small and emerging businesses are our priority. Let's give small business more choices for financing they need, and let's help credit unions get more capacity to meet that need. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yesterday was the 11th anniversary of the attack on America from 9/11 in 2001. where Americans were killed, and it was an act of terrorism. But yesterday, Americans were attacked again, in 2 attacks, in Egypt and in Libya. Apparently, terrorists attacking us again on 9/11. The embassy in Egypt was stormed, the American flag was brought down, and a black flag was raised by those that came into the compound. In Libya, the consulate was attacked, set afire, and our ambassador to Libya, KRISTI, was murdered. And apparently, according to the BBC, his body was carried through the streets of Benghazi. Both of these places are U.S. sovereign soil, the consulate and the embassy. The groups or individuals that committed these acts must be found. There's no evidence yet that there was any act by either one of these 2 governments, but by individuals or even by groups. In Libya, al-Qaeda cousins, as I call them, the Ansar al-Sharia, claims responsibility for the murder of our U.S. ambassador. It's no coincidence that these 2 attacks occurred nearly at the same time, and they both occurred on the anniversary of 9/11. Immediately, the attackers blamed a movie that was produced as the reason and excuse and justification for murdering. It's never the fault of a movie. It's never the fault of the United States. It's never the fault of Western culture that people are murdered in the name of somebody else's religion. It's the responsibility and it's the fault, and the people to be held accountable are the ones who committed these specific acts of terror against the United States. In the past, the United States has always held and went after those that were responsible for this type of conduct. In 1998, when the Kenyan embassy was attacked and Americans were killed, we responded. Of course, we responded in 9/11. We responded after the first World Trade Center bombing. In 1996, when 19 American soldiers were murdered in Saudi Arabia, we responded. In fact, President Bill Clinton said this: "The cowards who committed this murderous act must not go unpunished. We will not rest in our efforts to find who is responsible for this outrage, to pursue them and to punish them." And after 9/11, President Bush made this comment: "The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement agencies to find those responsible and bring them to justice." Madam Speaker, the United States must always respond to terrorists, and we must let them be reminded again and again we will respond in an appropriate manner, as we did in 9/11. We must respond today, and we must respond tomorrow. I'm encouraged that the President will soon address the nation on what our response will be. We must hold those personally accountable, because we must let people understand that they need to leave us alone. That is what that message needs to be. We must have justice in this terrorist attack by these individuals against America. Because, Madam Speaker, justice is what we do in America. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Woolsey, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to salute the Little League 12-year-old All-Stars from my hometown of Petaluma, California. I salute them for their amazing run in the 2012 Little League World Series. I couldn't be prouder of the way they represented our community and themselves. Even though they fell short of the championship, they distinguished themselves as one of this year's best youth baseball teams, finishing second in the country and third in the world. Even in their final loss to Tennessee, they showed fierce determination, rallying for a 10-run comeback to force extra innings. Each and every player contributed to the effort. Bradley Smith led the way with an astounding .636 batting average, a tournament-leading 14 hits, a record-breaking 6 doubles, and 11 RBIs, as well as great fielding and pitching. Hans Smith hit .429, leading the team with 4 home runs and knocking home more home runs, 12, than any other player in the tournament. Danny Marzo hit .348 with a walk-off home run against New Jersey on top of his outstanding pitching. Cole Tomei batted .333 with clutch hitting and dazzling third base defense that actually reminded many of Brooks Robinson. Logan Douglas, who provided great all-around leadership and top-notch relief pitching, also had a .318 batting average, and his 11 runs scored were the second highest in the tournament. Catchers Austin Peretti and James O'Hanlon provided perfect handling of the pitching staff, with J.O. contributing timely hits and Austin adding 8 runs scored in only 8 at-bats. Dylan Moore, Blake Booher, and Kempton Brandis all contributed clutch performances, including Kempton's 2 home runs against Tennessee, Blake's big hit to spark a rally against New Jersey, and Dylan's overall solid work in the field, on the mound, and at bat. Porter Slate scored 8 runs out of the lead-off spot while playing stellar defense at second base. Quentin Gago's home run against the Southwest would still be going if it hadn't hit the side of a hill. And his dominant pitching performance against Texas gave the team a huge lift. Andrew White provided outstanding relief pitching, not just in the Little League World Series, but throughout District 35 and regional play. Madam Speaker, not enough can be said about the coaching staff. Manager Eric Smith, Trevor Tomei, and Mike Slate, their commitment to the team and to the families was nothing short of remarkable. They just didn't teach the boys skills and fundamentals. They instilled in them poise, determination, and drive. The Petaluma National League All-Stars are talented ball players, but they also succeed because of grit, hustle, and desire. They revealed themselves to be young men of maturity and strong character. They demonstrated sportsmanship in victory and in defeat. They were models of teamwork and discipline, qualities that will serve them well throughout their lives. These boys exemplify what is best about youth sports, being true to the mission and values of Little League Baseball. Their performance on and off the field is a testament to their coaches, their parents, and their teachers, and their individual character. These boys are unquestionably champions. They are tomorrow's leaders, and they give confidence for our country's future. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. Yesterday was a remembrance of a tragedy beyond belief that happened to America on 9/11. There's another tragedy taking place, but it happens to be in Afghanistan. The tragedy is our young men and women are going there to give their life for a corrupt leader and a policy that will never change Afghanistan. During the August break, I had the privilege, like most members of Congress, to be in my district, to speak to numerous civic clubs, and 2 of the clubs I spoke to were retired military groups, one being the American Legion. Every time I talked about the failed policy in Afghanistan and the need to bring our troops home, I got applause, and I'm not a great speaker. But our military has done everything that it can do. I have beside me 3 Marines from my district, Camp Lejeune, were in Afghanistan training Afghans to be policemen. And one of the trainees turned around and shot and killed 3 Marines. This isn't the first time it's happened, and it's not the first time that I've lost Marines from the 3rd District of North Carolina. But the person they were training was an Afghan officer in the police force. It is an absolutely unwinnable situation. The purpose that Mr. Bush, the former president, said we're going to Afghanistan is to get bin Laden, well, he is dead, to disperse al-Qaeda. It is dispersed. On the 20th, which is next Thursday, we're going to hold a bipartisan news conference with the author of a book called Funding the Enemy by Douglas Wissing, W-I-S-S-I-N-G, who spent a number of years embedded with our military in Afghanistan. And he has seen the tragedy of the money going to Afghanistan ending up in the coffers of the Taliban to buy weapons to kill our young men and women. If I could advise Mr. Romney and Mr. Obama, I would say listen to the American people on our policy in Afghanistan, because the American people want our troops home. I hear both sides complaining about the debt, the cliff, sequestration, and all these things, and yet we're spending $10 billion a month in Afghanistan, and as Funding the Enemy says in that book, we can't even account for most of it. Yet we're going to cut programs here for children and senior citizens, but no, we don't even debate Afghanistan on the floor of the House. That is the tragedy. That is the tragedy. Just a few of us on both sides have been speaking out constantly on the failed policy in Afghanistan. The former commandant, who has been my advisor for 3 years, I'm not at liberty to say his name for the record, he has said to me, what do we say to the mother, the father, the wife of the last Marine or soldier killed to support a corrupt government and a corrupt leader in a war that cannot be won? Congress needs to awaken to the fact that we need to bring our troops home in 2013, the spring of 2013, and not the end of 2014. Madam Speaker, next week I will go to Walter Reed. I will visit the wounded from Afghanistan, some from Iraq. And I will leave with a heavy heart because I will see the broken bodies. I will see the young men and some women that have lost legs, other parts of their bodies, some paralyzed from the waist down, some with burned faces, and yet the Congress sleeps through this war. I ask my friends on both sides, when we get back in November, let's pass a resolution saying that we need to bring our troops home in 2013. Madam Speaker, before closing, I've signed over 10,855 letters to families in America and extended families because of my weakness and my mistake on Iraq, a war that never had to be fought. Look at Iraq today, it's falling apart. It is time for us to stop trying to build empires and to rebuild America, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, Republicans have pursued an obstructionist agenda since taking control of this body, cynically willing, seemingly, to risk even harm to our economy for political gain. The refusal of the House Republicans to even consider compromise has resulted in the 112th Congress becoming among the least productive Congresses ever. The 112th Congress is a Potemkin Congress when it comes to measured productivity. Consider the most simple, straightforward metric, the number of laws passed per Congress. The legislative output of this Congress, a mere 173 public laws passed, is a pittance when compared to the 900 public laws passed by what was called the Do-Nothing Congress of the Truman era, or the 333 public laws passed in an era of divided government in the 104th Congress. Or consider one of the most fundamental constitutional responsibilities, funding the government. Once again, the 112th Congress distinguishes itself of sheer incompetence, having managed to pass 0 appropriations bills. The 112th Congress looks even worse when directly compared to the Democratic-led 111th Congress, which boasted a productivity level on par with the legislative records during the era of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Lyndon Baines Johnson in the 30s and 60s, respectively. The landmark legislation enacted in the 2-year period between 2009 and 2010, from the Recovery Act, the Health Reform Bill, financial regulation, to put meager output of this current Congress to shame. Further, beyond these big three, at least a dozen other important bills were passed at that time period, including legislation addressing fair pay, student loans, consumer protection, national service, stem cell research, and food safety. The American people are tired of business as usual. They're tired of Congress waiting until the last possible moment to avert yet another disaster. And they're certainly tired of this House returning from a 37-day summer vacation only to hold a couple of show votes this week before rushing members out of town again next week, leaving in their wake a sea of critical work that remains undone. Our country faces serious, daunting challenges that demand action now, which is why I advocated canceling the August recess. The House now has an opportunity to take decisive action in the coming days on at least two major deadline issues facing Congress, passing a 5-year farm bill and enacting comprehensive postal reform. Despite the 112th Congress being among the least productive and the most dysfunctional in history, the Senate, not known for its speed, has managed to engage in constructive cooperation and addresses both of these issues in overwhelmingly bipartisan manner. On two of the most urgent matters facing this Congress, the Senate has exposed the extreme intransigence of this House Republican majority. Two Republicans, a Democrat and an Independent, developed the 21st Century Postal Service Act of 2012, which passed the Senate with overwhelming bipartisan support. On the vital 5-year reauthorization of the Farm Bill, the Senate again developed a reform bill, the Agriculture Reform, Food and Jobs Act of 2012, and also passed it with a bipartisan supermajority. Compromise is at the heart of these bipartisan measures, which are far from perfect and contain provisions I would oppose. However, both bills contain provisions vital to saving the Postal Service, safeguarding the health of American agricultural industry, and providing critical safety net for American families. In my perfect world, we'd pass my reform of the Postal Service for the 21st Century Act. And I'm sure in the House Republicans' perfect world would pass their House Postal Reform Act of 2011. But in the real world, I do not believe either of our constituents sent us here to stubbornly fight for the partisan perfect at the expense of the American good. If Republican leadership are willing to compromise on behalf of the American people, they will take up and pass the bipartisan bills S-1679 and S-3240 this week or next. I realize I risk appearing naive for even proposing compromise by taking up and passing Senate bills. But my own experience with my predecessor in the 11th District of Virginia gives me hope. As many of my colleagues are aware, even though former Congressman Tom Davis is a Republican and I'm a Democrat, we get together and we like to say that we belong to the same political party, the party of getting things done. We have roots in local government, and that's the ethos of local government. And I appreciate his generosity in working with me in the transition to the 111th Congress. I recall one extended transition meeting at a local Denny's. We were talking. There was a waitress that was going back and forth. We kind of thought she would recognize this, maybe want to say hello. In fact, she said, "You need to move on. I need that table." That's where the American people are. They want us to move on and get our business done so they can get on with theirs. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from South Dakota, Mrs. NOEM, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And today I wanted to bring to the attention of my colleagues something that is of utmost importance to this country and to our food supply and to this nation's farmers and ranchers. It's the importance of getting a farm bill done. Growing up on a farm in South Dakota and then farming for years with my family, I certainly recognize how volatile agriculture industry is. Our producers invest in seed and fertilizer. They put it in the dirt, and they hope that that fall that they have the opportunity to come back and harvest something that will provide for their family and provide food for this country and for this nation. The crops that are grown are relied upon to fulfill the need that we have in this country and across the world. Farming's risky. But because growing our food is in the interest of our national security, we provide a safety net that keeps our farmers on the land in good times and in bad times.
As you can see from these maps that I have here with me today, we are suffering through one of those tough times right now. Farmers can't control Mother Nature. Our farmers are facing one of the worst droughts that we've seen in decades. You just have to talk to a veteran farmer today to say that they haven't seen an instance like this since probably the 30s, where we have such widespread, long-standing drought that they are suffering through. It has a real impact on folks in rural America, and the rest of America relies on that food to feed their families. I want my colleagues to get a picture of just how important the Farm Bill is to this country and to people in the real world. While it may be easy to ignore the drought if you're in Washington, D.C. or in other parts of the country, when I go home every weekend, and when I was home and traveling all across our state throughout August, it was everywhere around me. Just yesterday I had the chance to sit down with a couple of producers from South Dakota. Brent and Barb were here from Houghton, South Dakota. And it was evident to me that when I visited with them that their concern was more for the next generation than for getting through a couple of tough days right now. They spoke of their sons, the love they have for their land, and the responsibility that they feel in feeding this country and making sure that we have a future where the United States can grow its own food to provide for its own people. They wrote me a letter about what the Farm Bill means to them, and I wanted to read part of that letter to you. I know you share our feelings on the importance of the bill. It's not only necessary to us now, but also for our 3 sons who want to continue farming, which has been in our family for 4 generations. We're so thankful and we're proud that they want to return to the farm, and we want to do all that we can to provide for them the same opportunities that we've had. The crop insurance portion of the Farm Bill has truly helped us in the past as we've struggled through wet conditions over parts of the last 20 years. Because of excess moisture, there have been years when we have been able to plant less than half of the acres of our total cropland. Now the tables have turned, and we're experiencing drought conditions in some areas of South Dakota, and we will again be relying on crop insurance. It's so important to our family farming operation as a business. It's allowed us to stay in business through those tough years. The safety net this Farm Bill would provide is crucial, not only to rural farmers like us, but to our state and to our country as a whole. Brent and Barb and other producers across America are in town this week. They're asking this House to take action on a Farm Bill, to give them the certainty that they need to have confidence to plant next year's crop. It will support both rural America, but also every single family that's out there buying groceries today. Later this morning, I'm going to be joining them at a rally that's called the Farm Bill Now Rally. And I'll be asking my colleagues to take action, to pass a Farm Bill. We need to get that Farm Bill done, to know what the policies are going to be in the next 5 years. It's right for our producers, it's right for our ranchers and farmers, it's right for this country, and for every family out there who's wanting to put food on the table that they can afford through these tough times. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Dreyer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 5 minutes to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, back in 2009, my good friend and the co-chair of the House Democracy Partnership, David Price of North Carolina, and I had the opportunity to visit former General and at that time U.S. Ambassador Carl Eikenberry, Ambassador to Afghanistan. We were at the Ambassador's residence in Kabul, and I was struck with a statement that was made by General Ambassador Eikenberry. He said, we have a tendency as Americans to express appreciation to men and women in uniform, those men and women who served in our nation's armed forces around the world. But too rarely do we extend our appreciation to the men and women who represented the United States of America in the Foreign Service as diplomats around the world. And General Eikenberry encouraged us to do that. And Mr. Price and I have consistently done that in the visits of the House Democracy Partnership to the 17 countries with which we've partnered over the past 7 years. And I have to say that 3 years later, just a few months ago, Mr. Price and I were leading a delegation to Afghanistan, and we recounted that story to our great diplomat, Ryan Crocker, the U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan. And Ambassador Crocker, when we shared the story with him, reminded us that more U.S. ambassadors have been killed since the Vietnam War than generals or admirals. We know that down at the Harry S. Truman building there is a plaque that lists the name of the 231 U.S. diplomats who've been killed since the first death in 1780. And, Madam Speaker, I have to say that the news that we have of the tragic death of Ambassador Chris Stevens in Benghazi, the U.S. consulate in Libya, is very sad news for all of us. Now, the upheaval in the Arab world has brought about many great things. For the first time in millennia, there are individuals who have been able to participate in elections and make decisions. But then we get the sad and tragic news that Ambassador Stevens and, according to the early reports, 2 Marines, maybe another Foreign Service officer, were killed in this tragic attack. And I would like to say that we have spent time there. We were just in Libya, Mr. Price and I, just a few weeks before Ambassador Stevens arrived. And Libya is a place that has held out great promise. I am determined, as I know Mr. Price is, to ensure that the promise that we saw several weeks ago in Libya will not be shattered by the tragic death of Ambassador Stevens. And, Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to be joined by my dear friend and colleague, Mr. Price, and would like to yield to him at this point.
I thank my colleague for yielding. Mr. Dreyer and I have partnered for many years in this work of the House Democracy Partnership, which we and many others in this body believe in very deeply, that we need to be good colleagues, not just nationally but internationally. And we need to reach out in ways that can strengthen democracy, strengthen representative institutions in countries that are friends of our country, and we can help bring those parliaments along. That's exactly why we visited Libya back in the spring. A delegation led by Mr. Dreyer. We were there a few weeks before Ambassador Stevens arrived. And I think it's fair to say that we were struck by the promise of Libya. Of course, they've had 42 years of dictatorial rule. The country has been liberated. There are still major challenges, obviously security challenges, as we are learning in a tragic way today. But the country is gradually being secured. Constituent assembly elections have been held, and parliamentary elections are on the way. So we have great hope for Libya, and we will be a friend to Libya. We have been and we will be a friend to Libya in bringing forward the promise of the Arab Spring. But our purpose here today is to mark this tragic loss, the 6th, I believe, ambassador in U.S. history to be killed in the line of duty. Our personnel in Libya are dedicated personnel, the best that the U.S. has to offer. The work that they're doing there is work that's in the national interest and work that is very, very valuable to Libya and to us. And this horrible tragedy is one that we want to mark in this House here today.
And I thank my friend for his contribution. Madam Speaker, if I may simply extend condolences to the loved ones of Ambassador Stevens, and to say that we need to ensure that those who are responsible for this tragic death are brought to justice, and we need to do everything that we can to continue to encourage the development of the rule of law, self-determination, political pluralism, and as Mr. Price has just said, the development of democratic institutions around the world. It's a universal right, and the United States of America is the single best model for that. So our thoughts and prayers again are with the loved ones of Ambassador Stevens. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First, I want to, of course, associate myself with the remarks from Mr. Dreyer and Mr. Price, who have done such terrific work on the spread of democracy, but also to lament the tragic loss of life and the courage displayed by our men and women in our foreign service and who are deployed abroad to represent the United States, its democracy, and its principles. Madam Speaker, I regretfully rise, however, to talk about another unhappy subject. Our fiscal house is burning, and in Washington we continue to play and fiddle. We have another 8, perhaps 13 days left, or less than that. I don't know whether we're going to be here in in October, but I do know that we're going to be here for a very short time this week, frankly, doing message bills. The middle-class tax cut, which passed the Senate, lays fallow somewhere, not brought to this floor, to assure that our middle-class citizens would understand that they weren't going to get a tax cut on January 1st, give them confidence, give our economy confidence to help grow our economy. We have not assured our doctors that the payments for Medicare services to patients will in fact be available. We have not taken substantive action to set aside the sequester with a balanced plan. There will be a bill on sequester that will be largely opposed on our side of the aisle because it does not provide for balance. It simply says set aside the sequester, which is the direct result of Republican policies. In fact, the Republicans have offered 2 bills on the floor which say that sequester is the option of choice if you don't meet certain numbers. They did that in their cut, cap, and balance bill, which was enforced how? Through sequestration. We understand that sequestration is an irrational act. Why is it an irrational act? Because it is as if you have a food budget and a movie budget at home, and you have tight finances that week, that month, that year. You don't cut your food budget exactly the same as you cut your movie budget. You, in fact, say we're going to forego a movie and make sure that we have healthy food on the table. That's what we ought to do. We ought to have a strategic way and a balanced way to get this deficit that is out of control and needs to be handled under control. And the best way to turn off the sequester is a balanced plan. But what we will see offered on this floor is not a balanced plan, but a plan which says do it our way or no way. Now, very frankly, that's been the history of this Congress. I've served in 16 Congresses. This is the least productive Congress in which I've served. Now, that view is shared by 2 scholars, Thomas Mann and Norman Ornstein, who wrote in a book and wrote in an op-ed. We've been studying Washington politics in Congress for more than 40 years, and never have we seen them, meaning the Congress of the United States, as dysfunctional. The American public share that view, of course, and our poll numbers reflect it, properly so. In our past writings, Mr. Mann and Mr. Ornstein go on, we have criticized both parties when we believed it was warranted. Today, however, we have no choice but to acknowledge that the core of the problem lies with the Republican Party. The GOP, they went on to say, has become an insurgent outlier in American politics, is ideologically extreme, scornful of compromise, unmoved by conventional understanding of facts, evidence, and science, and dismissive of the legitimacy of the political opposition, and therefore unwilling to compromise. That's what our gridlock is caused by, an unwillingness to compromise. The Senate's passed a farm bill. The Senate passed a farm bill which would help farmers threatened by drought. As a matter of fact, their own committee has reported out a farm bill. But that farm bill has not been brought to the floor because apparently the majority of Republicans aren't for a farm bill. So even their own bill is not brought to the floor, much less a bipartisan passed farm bill in the United States Senate, which could be passed and would get a significant number of Democratic votes, not because we believe it's exactly what we want, but because we believe it is a compromise that will work for America and America's farmers. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Speaker, the American public ought to know that in the next few days we're not going to be doing much of anything. Not on jobs for Americans, not on the fiscal cliff that confronts us, not on farm bills, not on the Violence Against Women Act, which also passed the United States Senate in a bipartisan, overwhelming fashion. No, we fiddle. We fiddle while the fiscal fires burn. I would urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, my Democratic colleagues and my Republican colleagues. I don't think we're going to get anything done before November 6th. I think it's going to be politics, politics as usual. The American public and America will suffer for that. But I think that's what's going to happen. But I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and Madam Speaker, I would urge the American people to demand of us that we not perceive the lame duck session as simply a time to further fiddle. It ought to be a time, my colleagues, when we act, we come together, we adopt a balanced, fair plan to get the fiscal house of America in order, to put ourselves on a fiscally sustainable path that is credible, that people believe in, so that the rating agencies, which are now talking about perhaps downgrading the United States of America, the most creditworthy nation on earth. Why? Not because we don't have the resources to solve our fiscal problems, but because they do not perceive that we have the political will and willingness to do so, or the courage. My colleagues, Americans expect more of us. We ought to expect more of ourselves. We have an obligation, a responsibility. We swore an oath to protect and defend not only the Constitution, but the welfare of this country. Putting our country on a fiscally sustainable path is absolutely essential. I don't think we're going to do it before November 6th, but I would hope every one of us who comes back here the second week in November, or the end of the second week of November, will pledge ourselves to work together as Americans, not as Democrats, not as Republicans, not as conservatives, not as liberals or moderates, but as Americans, understanding that the only way every commission that's reported has said we're going to get our house in order is to come together and do so in a balanced way. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, that means making sure that we deal with revenues. We pay for what we buy. That's what revenues are about. We pay for what we buy. And then we deal with the spiraling costs of health care. Everybody's talked about that. We have to do it. President Clinton talked about that. Paul Ryan talks about that. We have to do it. But we can keep the guarantee of Medicare. We can keep the guarantee of Social Security in the process while getting our fiscal house in order on the entitlement side. Ladies and gentlemen of this House, we owe it to the American people. The American people expect us to act responsibly. We are fiddling while the fiscal house of America burns. Let us summons the courage, the judgment, and the personal responsibility each one of us has, that when we return here after the election, and hopefully the politics is behind us, those 30-second, 60-second ads which misinterpret, misinform, and dissemble are behind us. And we say to all of our citizens that we represent, we are prepared to exercise the courage and judgment to put our country on a fiscally sustainable path that is credible. Not only will rating agencies believe in it, our citizens will believe in it, our businesses will believe in it, and the international community will as well. I thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to honor a true American hero, Neil Armstrong, a space pioneer who profoundly influenced world history. I can still remember wearing my most prized possession, a blue Fly Me to the Moon t-shirt with the Apollo 11 mission insignia on it. I remember the feeling of seeing those grainy images of Neil on the Sea of Tranquility, and as he put his left foot down on lunar soil, his famous "one step for man, one giant leap for mankind" quote. That historical moment changed America forever, and the world changed with us. And Neil Armstrong's quiet heroism helped catapult America to be the global leader. His legacy of American exceptionalism inspired generations of young people to take up science and space exploration. In the 43 years since his moon mission, Armstrong believed deeply that America should continue to explore new worlds. Upon learning the Obama administration had canceled NASA's plans to return to the moon, Neil Armstrong, a very private man, became a vocal critic of this failure and the willingness to allow other nations to surpass America's space leadership. The state of NASA's human space exploration plans, he told Congress last fall, is lamentably embarrassing and unacceptable. One of the highlights of my life will always be shaking the hand of my childhood hero. Neil and I were united in our opposition to President Obama's plan to cancel the Constellation program and diminish the priority of human spaceflight in his 2010 budget and national space policy document. Excuse me for a second. It was humbling to work with Mr. Armstrong and several other Apollo astronauts like Gene Cernan and Jim Lovell to fight to restore a strong NASA budget and develop a comprehensive human space exploration program worthy of America's greatness as explorers. America needs a clear and purposeful mission worthy of our nation's continued investment to regain our leading role and remain the dominant human space country in the world. Our nation suffers a great loss with Neil Armstrong's passing, but his courage and commitment to greatness will live on in the next generation of explorers to come. For the rest of my time on this planet, I will continue to honor his contributions to American exceptionalism and his legacy by pushing for a strong human space exploration program that will take America to the moon, to Mars, and beyond. My thoughts and prayers are with Neil Armstrong's family and the entire NASA family as we cope with this tremendous loss. America mourns with you as we remember Neil's amazing journey. Neil's philosophy about life is captured best by advice given by one of Neil's moonwalking brothers, Gene Cernan, when he spoke to a group of students at Sartarsha Middle School in my hometown of Sugar Land, Texas. Gene told the kids, always shoot for the moon, because if you miss, you'll see the stars. Neil Armstrong gave us the moon so we can look to the heavens and see the stars. Thank you, Neil. God bless. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Nunneley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This week, the Congressional Coalition on Adoption is recognizing the individuals and families from around the country who've enriched the lives of children through foster care and adoption. I rise this morning to share the story of a couple who's dedicated their lives to providing not just a home for children, but a family. Pat and Sandra Nunneley from Tupelo, Mississippi had lived the American dream. They married in their teens and over the next 14 years had 4 children born into their family. When they married, Pat was working in a low-paying manufacturing job. But he soon entered the profession of life insurance sales. He possessed a good personality and a strong work ethic, and because of that, he was natural for the business, and his career advanced quickly, both in income and in prestige. Sandra had a love of infants and a desire to be a nurse. However, she decided to forego her nursing education and her career in order to get married and then raise a family. Later, she did enter nursing school. In fact, she graduated from nursing school the same year her oldest child graduated from high school. By 1980, they were in their mid-40s, and they were enjoying the fruits of their labors together. Pat had become vice president of one of the largest life insurance companies in his state. Sandra was enjoying the love of her life, taking care of newborn babies as an intensive care nurse. They were enjoying a standard of living that neither of them had ever thought possible. In addition, empty nest was in sight. 2 of their children were in college and 2 others weren't far behind. In short, life was good. They'd worked hard and they were nearing their stage of life when they could really begin to enjoy it. But any plans they may have made changed in November of 1980 when a little girl was born prematurely. That month, while America was preparing to celebrate Thanksgiving, we were watching the peaceful transition of power begin in the White House. We were watching an international hostage crisis. And when the world is watching presidents and Ayatollahs, who cares when a little premature girl is born? Thank God somebody did. This little girl was born with numerous health problems, and the pediatrician's quick diagnosis was that this infant wouldn't live through the night. Medical staff should make her short time on earth as peaceful as possible. And at the conclusion of the shift, Sandra left her patient with the belief that this little girl would not be alive when she got back to work the next morning. Much to her surprise, when she arrived the next morning for work, the little girl was still alive. She proved to have a strong will to live, but she'd been abandoned by her parents. So after 3 months in the intensive care unit, her pediatrician observed to Sandra one day, "We've done miracles for this child, but the one thing we've not been able to give her is a home. She's never had anyone to hold her, to rock her, or to sing to her." And over the next few days, Pat and Sandra became foster parents as she left her job and the child entered their home. Child number 5. 3 years later, Sunday lunch was interrupted by a desperate knock at the door. Sandra had taken a leave of absence from her job to take care of this little girl, and she volunteered to offer child care to a single mom from the hospital where she worked. That young woman was having a great deal of difficulty coping with the many demands of a single mom, and she desperately asked, "Miss Nunneley, would you please take my baby?" Thinking there must be some kind of temporary crisis, the Nunnelees replied, "Yeah, we'll be glad to take care of your child for a couple of days." And the young mom responded, "I don't want you to take him for a couple of days. I want you to take him forever." Child number 6. 4 years after that, another desperate contact. This one a phone call from the County Department of Human Services. An infant boy had been born with very severe heart problems. The doctor's prognosis was that he wouldn't live beyond age 10 or 12. His parents didn't want to keep such a sick child. There were no available foster parents with medical expertise or the willingness to adopt such a child in that condition. And the desperate social worker said, "You've done more than any family should be asked to do, but there's nobody else." Child number 7. That child's lived more than a decade beyond the doctor's initial prognosis, and while he still has some health problems, he's recently completed school and he's moved out on his own. And for the first time in 54 years, Pat and Sandra Nunneley don't have a child in their home. Oh, holidays are filled with the noise of 7 children and their spouses and several grandchildren. These are true American heroes. Their children, their grandchildren call them Mimi and Pat Daddy. Their friends call them Pat and Sandra. My 6 brothers and sisters, and I are proud to call them Mom and Dad.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Madam Chair, last year an intense debate was underway in Congress
as to how to respond to the turmoil in Libya. The imminent slaughter of the people of Benghazi by former dictator Gaddafi led the United States to sustain a NATO-led coalition to stop the bloodshed. Now our ambassador to Libya, Chris Stevens, is dead, killed by the very people we went there to save. Americans can tolerate ingratitude. Americans can tolerate insult. But Americans cannot tolerate the senseless killing of the official representative of our country and 3 other diplomatic personnel. The governing structures of Libya must respond in the strongest way. They should publicly state their condemnation and commitment to restoring order. Democracy is not an election. It is the understanding of the protection of the inherent dignity and rights of each person, supported by the structures that bring about the just rule of law. We honor Ambassador Stevens, Foreign Service Officer Sean Smith, and 2 others whose names I do not yet have for their heroic service. May they rest in peace. Similarly, in Cairo, Egypt, the storming of our embassy represents an attack on America. By the norms of international law, custom, and tradition, the scaling of the walls of our embassy severely threatens America's long-standing relationship with Egypt, so fruitfully solidified after the peace accords in the Middle East in the 1970s. President Morsi must decide, will his government tolerate chaos and violence? Will he abandon Egypt's leading role as a force for stability in the Middle East? Will he use democracy for consolidation of power while rejecting its central tenets? The responsibility of President Morsi is also to speak swiftly and state clearly that the Egyptian government, duly elected, is committed to its international responsibilities and the deeper responsibilities of self-government. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until 12 noon today.
The House back at noon Eastern, starting with a bill to swap federal land for about 90,000 acres of state-owned land in the Boundary Waters Canoe area. A number of amendments will be offered. Then the House turns to debate on extending the electronic surveillance law called FISA for another 5 years. Votes are expected around 2 p.m. Eastern. Last votes this afternoon at 5. We will have live House coverage at noon here on C-SPAN. Next up, though, we're going to take you to the White House. Just a short while ago, the President, accompanied by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, came out to make a statement about the death of Ambassador Chris Stevens and